Hey, what's up everybody? Welcome back to News Dose, and Nintendo and all of the Switch 2 news has been a little bit quiet these past few months, and I don't like that one bit. But today, they're back. The floodgates just opened up because we got some brand new information that possibly revealed a release window that's sooner than expected, and there's also a rising belief that there will be another OLED model after all. So, I mean, yeah, all this sounds crazy because, it goes against every previous rumor that we've heard, but it is something that's going around, and we're going to dive into all of that today and just kind of see if it's worth believing. Then also, Xbox dropped their financial report, and at first glance, it is very impressive, though keep in mind that this is with the inclusion of Activision Blizzard. So they, of course, saw a big boost as expected, but the big news here is not the results itself, but rather one specific result in combination with what they said. So we're going to get into all of that as well. Before we get started, though, do make sure to hit that subscribe button. Unlike the Lakers versus the Joker, aka La Daddy and the Nuggets, put some actual effort into hitting your shot, or in this case, hit that button. With that said, though, let's get right into things. Starting off with Resident Evil. The longtime horror leaker Dusk Gollum revealed some information that he's been hearing behind scenes, which I think includes some good news, but maybe also some disappointing news depending on how you take the situation. So according to him, he said, "I do know a couple of years ago that for Resident Evil 9, the goal was to reveal the game this year and aim for a 2025 release. But I have been hearing murmurs the last few months that Resident Evil 9 might have been internally delayed for one reason or another. I've seen it suggested that another Resident Evil game may end up being announced and released first before Resident Evil 9, but no, this is not something I've heard concretely. I think the reveal of the Resident Evil game pushed forward to release before Resident Evil 9 is pretty funny and would catch a lot of people off guard." So, I mean, depending on how you look at all of that, the downside here is that Resident Evil 9, yes, could be delayed. But truthfully, I don't really think that this is an issue at all. First off, I trust Capcom because I think they've earned that trust these past 7 or so years. To me, they've been among the best developers, just period. But also for me personally, delays just don't really bother me all that much because I rather developers to release a good game. And if a delay helps with that goal, then yeah, I'm all for it. There's also been a lot of rumors, though, that Resident Evil 9 is the biggest entry in a franchise with some open-world elements. So if that's true, I would expect an extended development period. I mean, I'm not always necessarily a big fan of open worlds. I don't think that open world automatically means better, and I'm not exactly sure how that will work in a Resident Evil title, but if it's actually true, I absolutely would expect some development hurdles. Now, the good news here, though, is that Dusk Gollum did tease a new game that could release before Resident Evil 9. Now, we have no idea what this game actually is, but we can definitely throw out some educated guesses based on how they've been releasing games over the last 7 or so years. If it's a brand new game, maybe a new entry for the Revelation series. There was a rumor a while back that Nintendo and Capcom were working on Revelations 3. Maybe they could get that out for the Switch successor. Maybe that is something that is possible. But if not that, maybe another remake. They could still go back and remake Resident Evil 1. I think that would be absolutely fantastic. There's Code Veronica as well. I've seen a lot of requests for that one. Or they could just go to the next big game being Resident Evil 5. Really, any 3 of those games would be pretty amazing. So, I don't know. Despite this possible delay, us Resident Evil fans really are just kind of living the good life right now. Now, we also got an update for a mysteriously absent PlayStation game, Lost Soulside. This is a Chinese-developed game that a lot of people have been hyped about since it was first announced. It looks pretty good based on everything that we've seen, but it's been in development for a very long time, close to 10 years, I believe, but it does look like we're finally going to get some news sometime relatively soon. This comes way from the official Twitter account for Lost Soulside, and they said it got an ISBN license approval to release in China. Now, for most of us, that probably doesn't mean all that much on its own, but thankfully, Z-Huge added some context and said that this means the game has been reviewed and can officially launch in mainland China. In other words, there will be news for the launch of the game fairly soon, at least within the next 3 months or so, typically. So with that in mind, and really just how this game is connected to PlayStation, the first thing that immediately comes to mind here is that rumored PlayStation Showcase next month. Could this game get a big reveal then with an official release date? I mean, I certainly hope so, but either which way, I am glad to see these studios from these Eastern countries get so much more recognition. It's clear that there is so much talent out there. We saw that last year with Liza P, and here recently with Stellar Blade. Both of those turned out to be great games, and they're both from Korean studios. And hopefully, later this year, we'll also get Lost Soul Side and Wukong Black Myth, both of which are from Chinese studios. So it's really great to see these up and rising AAA studios from regions that we don't typically see. I think it just adds an extra flavor to the game industry as a whole. Okay, so let's go and talk about this Nintendo Switch 2 rumor, or I guess actually really multiple rumors in this case, because this all started with a report by Vandal. Now, this is a website that most of us probably haven't heard of, but apparently this is a long-running Spanish website that reportedly leaked accurate information for the Switch OLED in the past. So you can kind of take this rumor as you will, but that's why some people are taking it serious. More or less, though, they basically said the Switch 2 will be bigger, which is something that we expect. It is believed to have an 8-inch display, but interestingly, according to them, it will be compatible with the current Switch Pro controller. But there's a chance that won't be the case for the current Joy-Cons. Now, the reason for this is because you can see here posted by the Video Game Chronicle, they said, according to the site, Switch 2's Joy-Con controllers will attach to the console magnetically. As current Joy-Cons connect to Switch using a REL system, it's unclear if they'll be forwards compatible with the new console. Now, I have to be honest here, if the current Joy-Cons aren't compatible, I'm really perfectly okay with that. In fact, I think this could actually be a potential improvement because as good as the Switch is, I love this console, but those Joy-Cons just aren't comfortable. I personally use a Switch grip just so I can make the Switch more comfortable to play. But the other issue here, and this has been well documented, the current Joy-Cons have a lot of stick drift issues. So again, I'm all for a controller refresh. I actually encourage it. So, give us a new design, make it a little bit bigger since it's attached to a bigger screen. Maybe it'll be a little bit more comfortable and less cramped. And you know what? We'll just kind of see how it all goes. I will not miss those Joy-Cons at all if any of this is actually true. Now, with that said, there are questions of how reliable a magnetic system can be. Does that introduce a stability problem? Are these things just going to fall off while you're playing in handheld mode? And I definitely understand the concern with all that. That's natural, and I really thought the same thing when I first read this. So if this is true, they'll definitely have to probably reassure fans once they reveal it. Maybe there's a latch that they can kind of snap into place with, but it is something that we'll need to let Nintendo reveal. I definitely need to see more on whatever this is. After this report, though, there was actually a second report that was posted online, and this is from a Korean website, which is actually really interesting in this case because this report was about the Switch 2 manufacturing. According to them, Nintendo is working closely with Samsung for multiple components, which Samsung, of course, is based in South Korea, hence why this leak is coming from that region. It might actually give this report a little bit of extra credibility. But again, and I can't emphasize this enough, it's just a rumor. Nothing is confirmed. But there was two very interesting things that they claimed. The first of which is that they said, and keep in mind here that this is Google translated, but it says, according to the industry on the 24th, Nintendo Switch 2 is scheduled to be released as early as the second half of this year. In fact, in the parts industry, much of the contract for initial production has been negotiated. So does this mean that there is once again a chance that the Switch 2 will release in late 2024? Every other rumor kind of says otherwise, and that'll instead release in 2025. So which one should you believe? Well, I think the way to look at this is that really both can be true. And what I mean by that is that Nintendo has a contract with production lines. That's not something that they can simply stop unless there's some kind of huge problem. But at the same time, just because, Switch 2 units might be ready for the second half of 2024, that doesn't necessarily mean that Nintendo will release it during that same time frame. They could actually build up supply and then just release it at a later date. I mean, from how I understand things currently, Nintendo didn't reportedly delay the Switch 2 because of hardware. Rather, the problem seems to be they don't have the proper software prepared for a launch in 2024. They want a better launch lineup, hence the delay to 2025 when they'll have more games ready. So personally, I don't really think this new report changes the idea of that 2025 release date. I mean, sure, I would love for that 2025 release date to be wrong because I want the Switch 2 this year, but I just don't really take this report as any kind of concrete information. The other thing that they said, though, and this might even be more interesting because they claim it's reported that Nintendo considered China's BOE panel for this next generation OLED model, but ultimately decided to use Samsung's display panel. Even though BOE's proposed panel price was lower than Samsung's, it is said to have taken patent risks, etc. into consideration. However, if Nintendo decides to release only LCD panels rather than OLED due to price burden, it is highly likely that Chinese panels will be used. So this kind of makes it sound like there could still be a chance for an OLED model, despite, again, some of those rumors that we've previously heard. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that this is going to happen at launch, but one thing that they could do is, theoretically, we've seen both PlayStation and Xbox do this. They've launched with multiple SKUs, and maybe Nintendo could do a similar thing. They could have one SKU being a cheaper LCD model, and then the other an OLED model that'll cost an extra $50 or so. I mean, it's kind of hard to tell if they would actually release two different SKUs right at launch, or, would they just kind of release an OLED model later down the road, kind of like what they did this generation. I think the problem with that, though, is just it kind of puts early adopters in a weird situation. A lot of those early adopters might feel a little annoyed that they have to, trade in their current Switch just to get what they truly want. So I think the best case scenario here would be to launch with both models at the same time. Whether they'll do that, though, I mean, I guess we'll see, but it does sound like there might be plans for an OLED model, whether at launch or later down the road. Now, one last thing I want to talk about here is Xbox and their financial report. At first glance, this is mostly really impressive because you can see here that gaming revenue saw a 51% year-over-year boost, which is absolutely incredible. Xbox content and services also rose by a massive 62%. But you do have to kind of keep in mind here that this now includes Activision Blizzard. I mean, that's why they acquired them after all, because look at how much it's helped them. I mean, we can now say it. Xbox is a legitimate gaming behemoth with the inclusion of companies like Activision Blizzard and Bethesda. They are now one of the biggest gaming companies in terms of revenue. But then on the other side, there's their hardware. And this is something that a lot of people are kind of paying attention to with just how everything has unfolded really this year in 2024. As you can see, Xbox hardware was down 31%. And, this brings forth the age-old question. Is Xbox's hardware division strong enough to support their vision? And to that, I really think yes, they are, but maybe not necessarily in the way that we used to think for consoles. It's clear to me, and I've talked a lot about this on the channel, that the console industry is changing. And I'm not just talking about for Xbox either. Really, for both PlayStation and Xbox, they are battling ballooning budgets in a stagnant console market. So both of them are looking to expand beyond just their consoles. Now, they're doing it in different ways. PlayStation, I think, is really just going to focus on their consoles, PC, and mobile gaming. Whereas Xbox, they've been in that PC market for a while, and I think that's been very profitable for them. But they do have that new, more multi-platform approach where they will bring over some games to rival consoles as well. Now, with that said, I think their own consoles are still very important. I think their console division is their driving force for something like Xbox Game Pass. And they do have a lot of passionate fans that buys a lot of games on those consoles. So despite the less than stellar sales, Xbox consoles aren't going anywhere. 30 million consoles is still a lot of consumers. So they will continue to make more consoles. They've confirmed this over and over again. But I think there's also this growing belief that, yes, they will be more open than ever to the idea of publishing some of their games on other rival consoles. I mean, it's definitely a strange situation to think about, but Microsoft CEO said this during the financial report. Finally, we're expanding our games to new platforms, bringing 4 of our fan favorites to Nintendo Switch and Sony PlayStation for the first time. In fact, earlier this month, we had 7 games among the top 25 on the PlayStation Store, more than any other publisher. He also said that we are committed to meeting players where they are by bringing great games to more people on more devices. We set third-quarter records for game streaming hours, console usage, and monthly active devices. I mean, you have to remember that Satya Nadella very publicly dislikes the idea of exclusivity. I mean, he just wants to sell software. So, as he said during the FTC trial, if he has it his way, they would do away with that exclusivity entirely. And that's something that I've been saying. I think the decision to port some of their games, like Grounded and Sea of Thieves, to PlayStation and Nintendo, I think that's coming from Microsoft's upper management and not necessarily from the Xbox team. We've heard rumblings that some of the Xbox team is disgruntled by this more multi-platform approach. Not everybody agrees with this, but when you see the results and you see games like Grounded and Sea of Thieves top the charts on PlayStation, it's kind of evident that it's working out for them. And I think Microsoft's kind of looking at that and they're like, yeah, maybe we need to do more of this. So I think by this point, I would expect more to come. Now, that doesn't mean that they're not going to have exclusive games, but they could bring other, maybe live service games over to PlayStation, maybe something like State of Decay 2. That could be a game that would work very well on there. But it's really just a matter of them balancing that fine line. How do you keep some games exclusive to Xbox and keep your fan base engaged, all while also giving other games away? It's going to be a PR nightmare, I think. I think the messaging is going to be very hard for them to convey, but I think they'll try to keep that balance in check as much as possible. They'll still offer big-time exclusives, but, you know, the console market is definitely changing, with Xbox forming an unheard of, but possibly very profitable change for them. Anyways, though, that's going to be it for this episode, but do let me know what you all think about the Xbox situation. I don't expect everybody to like it, and maybe you actually view Satya Nadella's statement differently. Maybe you don't believe he's referring to more multi-platform games, but I do want your thoughts in the comments below. But until next time, peace out.